Good morning, Mr. Chairman, and I guess it's still morning, and members of the committee. My name is David Wright, and I am Vice Chairman of the South Carolina Public Service Commission. In addition to that, I'm past chairman and current member of the Subcommittee on Nuclear Issues and Waste Disposal and a member of the Full Electricity Committee of the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, and I also serve as chairman of the Nuclear Waste Strategy Coalition. The issues that you are addressing today are very important to South Carolina and any state that is home to commercial spent nuclear fuel or the nation's defense waste. I'm grateful to have this opportunity to represent and share our views concerning the disposition of spent nuclear fuel currently stored at nuclear power plant sites that is intended for ultimate disposal at the Yucca Mountain Geological Repository. By way of the Nuclear Waste Policy Act of 1982, the federal government became responsible for disposal of high-level radioactive waste, including spent or used nuclear fuel from commercial reactors. Utilities, ratepayers, and regulators had the expectation from the NWPA that the Department of Energy would begin initial waste acceptance and disposal in the properly licensed and constructed repository by January 31st of 1998. Utility ratepayers have paid and continue to pay for the disposal cost of the material. To date, ratepayers in states that receive power from commercial nuclear utilities have paid over $17 billion into the Nuclear Waste Fund. Including allocated interest, the Nuclear Waste Fund today totals almost $35 billion, but only a fraction of the money collected from ratepayers has actually been spent on the developing of the Yucca Mountain Repository. The ratepayers in South Carolina, Mr. Chairman, have paid nearly $1.3 billion into the Nuclear Waste Fund, or more than $2.3 billion when interest is included. State public utility commissions like mine are one of the stakeholders on the disposition of used nuclear fuel from commercial reactors because the fees paid to the Nuclear Waste Fund by the current caretakers of the used fuel, that would be electric utilities, are passed on to ratepayers who are supplied with electricity from nuclear power generation. When the director of the Office of Civilian Radioactive Waste Management within the Department of Energy submitted the Yucca Mountain Repository license application in June of 2008, it was a comprehensive document. The 8,000-page document was the culmination of over 25 years of exhaustive investigation of the site. Like others, I expected the NRC to conduct a rigorous review and conduct an open, fair, and inclusive adjudicatory process. The filing of the license application was an important step because it appeared to take the application out of the political arena and put it under a full-blown court review that would be based on science, not politics. Since 1998, when DOE failed to meet its obligation to begin waste acceptance for disposal, organizations that I and my state are a part of have simply asked that the government fulfill its part of the bargain and remove the spent fuel per the standard contract, since the utilities and ratepayers continue to pay for services not performed. That remains our position, as we believe that the license application shows that Yucca Mountain will meet the requirements of the NWPA and regulations. If Yucca Mountain cannot be licensed through the NRC process or is licensed but not built, we interpret NWPA as still requiring DOE to develop and dispose of spent nuclear fuel in a geologic repository. Therefore, unless the law is repealed or amended or to direct otherwise, Congress is the only body that can authorize DOE to conduct a site search for another suitable repository site. This is particularly costly in most locations where the fuel pool cooling storage capacity at the reactor sites has long since been filled. In addition, the older fuel in the spent fuel pools is being removed and placed in concrete and steel containers called dry cask that are stored outside in concrete vaults. More than 62,000 metric tons of uranium is currently stored in pools or dry cask storage at nuclear plant sites in the United States. This amount increases with each refueling cycle, which generally occurs about every 18 months. License applications for at least 24 new nuclear units have been submitted to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. The amount of spent nuclear fuel to be stored will increase as new units are constructed and old units are relicensed, usually for an additional 20 years, as is happening with numerous reactors. Nearly 3,800 metric tons of uranium is stored at 4 nuclear plant sites in South Carolina, Mr. Chairman, which are home to 7 reactors, as you know. 2 nuclear units at the V.C. Summer Nuclear Station in Jenkinsville, South Carolina, have been approved by the South Carolina Public Service Commission and are awaiting license approval by the NRC. License applications for another 2 units near Gaffney, South Carolina, have been submitted to the NRC, but not to the South Carolina Public Service Commission. This nation will need more baseload electric generation as the population grows and the economy recovers. Some areas, such as the Southeast in general and South Carolina in particular, need for baseload generation is needed in the near future. Renewable energy, conservation, and efficiency help to lessen the amount of baseload generation needed, but cannot entirely eliminate that need. The climate and health impacts of burning coal have forced utilities to depend upon gas-fired and nuclear plants to meet the need for new baseload generation. Without a solution to the storage of spent nuclear fuel, meaning a permanent repository, state regulators may be hesitant to approve the construction of new nuclear units, and utilities may be hesitant to construct new nuclear units even if the NRC approves the license applications. Such circumstances could result in reduced electric reliability, brownouts, and increased cost of electricity, as gas-fired generation would be the only option, and its price would increase as the demand for natural gas increases, all else being equal. Federal courts have already ruled that the federal government is liable for the added storage costs past the dates agreed in original contracts with spent fuel utilities. The Department of Energy already faces at least $1.5 billion in court judgments and legal expenses resulting from failure to meet the government's obligations. In 2009, when DOE had a plan to begin waste acceptance and disposal at Yucca Mountain by 2017, DOE officials estimated that the liability for 65 cases could reach $12.3 billion, growing further by at least $500 million for each additional year of delay. DOE pays these court-determined liabilities from the judgment fund. What is really happening is this. Because of the federal government's failure to construct a permanent repository, ratepayers are paying up to 4 times for ongoing spent fuel storage and future disposal, and that does not include decommissioning funds. First, ratepayers are paying into the Nuclear Waste Fund for storage at the Deep Geologic Repository at Yucca Mountain. Second, because of the initial delay, ratepayers have to pay through rates to expand and re-rack their existing cooling pools in order to accommodate more waste. Third, ratepayers are continuing to pay through rates to keep the waste stored at the existing plant sites in dry cask storage. And finally, all taxpayers, not just ratepayers, are paying through taxes for judgments and settlements through the Judgment Fund. Congress should suspend collection of the nuclear waste fees until further notice and refund the Nuclear Waste Fund money to ratepayers if Yucca is not built. Not counting defense waste, over 62,000 metric tons of spent fuel is stored in 72 operating and shut down reactor sites in 34 states. Individuals and organizations opposed to nuclear power will raise questions or even voice fears over safety and security at some of these storage facilities. Although the utilities and NRC contend that storage is safe and secure, it still costs ratepayers big money to implement individualized security programs for each of these locations around the country. How can this be more efficient, safe, secure, or cost-effective than having all spent nuclear fuel and defense waste at one secure, deep geologic location? Recently, there's been great interest in the reprocessing or recycling, as some call it, of spent nuclear fuel. The organizations that I am a member of, including NARUC, have supported research into reprocessing and recycling and share the views that if there will be substantial global nuclear power expansion, there will probably come a time when uranium becomes more scarce and expensive and closing the fuel cycle will become necessary. But no matter the future course of this country, whether we reprocess, recycle, or maintain the status quo, a geologic repository is still needed for defense-related high-level radioactive waste that has already been reprocessed or cannot be reprocessed, and the residue from any future reprocessing program. Finally, the states of Idaho and South Carolina, and maybe Washington, as was mentioned a while ago, all have agreements with the federal government with a date certain to move defense waste out of their respective states. There are penalties. They are substantial for the government's failure to comply, and that's just another way that the taxpayer, all taxpayers, not just ratepayers, are going to pay for the government's failure. Thank you for the time today, and I appreciate being here. And